So, starting your emergency fund can be really important whenever you are first getting started in your personal finance journey. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But hey, it's me, Brandon, the enlisted money guy. And I just really wanted to talk about the emergency fund and why that's been such an important part of our financial journey and why I think you should definitely look into getting an emergency fund. And this is actually part of my get started checklist that you can get for free on my website. So just look on there if you need a little extra information. But an emergency fund. So really what is it is kind of the first thing, and why do you need an emergency fund? So getting an emergency fund kind of puts a little buffer in between you and some kind of financial emergency, whether that's the car breaks down, if you own your house, heat goes out, whatever. Just there's always something that comes up, and it seems like it always kind of creeps in whenever you're trying to get ahead. So as soon as you get a few dollars saved up or whatever, it seems like something comes up and becomes a problem. So it's been really interesting for us. Pretty much as soon as we kind of set aside money for an emergency fund, we kind of stopped having issues. We really haven't had to use the emergency fund much at all, other than maybe once or twice. But that was really temporary, like in between duty stations or when we needed a little extra cash, just temporarily while we were buying a vehicle or something like that. So it really hasn't been something that we needed. But before, it seemed like we had emergencies all the time. So I don't know, yeah, some kind of emergency repellent if you have extra cash. And the other thing too is it's not got to be like anything major to start out. You can have a small emergency fund. I think our emergency fund started off as like $50 in a savings account, and then we kind of added that. And then whenever we finally kind of, I guess, kind of finished our emergency fund, I think we did that with a little extra that we got in a tax return one year. So it doesn't have to be super complicated. One thing though, like kind of where do you want to put your emergency fund? Like where do you keep this money? Um, you don't want to invest it because this is money that you want to be able to use really easily. So you don't want to put it in the stock market. You don't want to put it in like a CD or something like that, that it's going to be, there's going to be a penalty to get that money back. I highly suggest looking at something like a high yield savings account, or potentially even like a money market account, that you can pull money out of really quickly. For us, we actually keep our emergency fund in a whole separate financial institution than our main checking account. But I have a checking account attached to that, so that if I need to get money from here and use it right now, I can just transfer the money into that checking account, and then I can write a check or swipe a debit card and get it taken care of. So you want it accessible, but not too accessible. Before we had it to where we couldn't even get the money. It would be like a 2-day transfer period, which was good in the beginning because it gave us kind of like that buffer. We couldn't use it, so it had to really be an emergency. But if it was really an emergency, we kind of would want to use it a little quicker than 2 days. So that's how we have it set up now. You can kind of set it up however you want, but I highly suggest having this in a separate account so that you can, mentally note it, and actually most banks now, you can actually nickname it, and say emergency fund, or at least ours does. And so then that way you can mentally just set that money aside, and then you don't touch it. And emergencies are going to happen. People get into car accidents and have to pay a deductible. Like there's just all kinds of stuff. Like the transmission went out in my truck. That, yeah, I was not planning on, having to pay for that. So, having that money set aside is really, really important. So, like emergencies will happen. And the other thing too is, issues with pay happen a lot too. I know for me, my pay has definitely gotten messed up before, and for my soldiers, I mean, that was one thing. As a leader, I always have a soldier with a pay issue. It seems like no matter how hard we try, as soon as we get everybody's pay fixed, it seems like something else happens. Somebody gets married, and then it takes forever to get BAH, started, or somebody PCS is in, and finance doesn't update, whatever. So there's always that's probably, I would say, for service members, that's probably one of your biggest risks, is just having a pay issue, and not getting paid. So not to mention, more recently, like government shutdowns. I mean, there's a shutdown scare just about every year, and most of the time they pass like some kind of a resolution or something to make sure that we get paid, but not always. I can remember whenever we didn't get paid, some of the banks did step in and help out, but yeah, that's not always going to be the case. You don't want to bank on that. You want to be able to take care of yourself, and be self-reliant. Um, the other thing too is, like I kind of mentioned, the emergency fund size, like how big, how much of an emergency fund should you have? And that's going to be, it's going to be individual to you. But I mean, kind of the rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months of expenses. I, at least starting out, I didn't keep that much. I kept about 2 months, about 2 months, 3 months, because I do have fairly steady pay, and we do have other options available if we really didn't have anything. But like I said, I don't want to have to go to AER or Navy Marine Corps Relief Society or something like that. I want to be able to take care of myself and not have other people in my business. So yeah, so that's kind of what we started at. I think we did, 2 months of pay is what I started with. But like I said, I started with like $50 a month, and then just kind of added to that, and then eventually we went to we got a tax return, and then just kind of filled that up. Now I will say here recently we've kind of looked at it, and I've decided that we need to kind of bump up our emergency fund. I would like to have a full 6 months of pay in there, especially as I look toward transitioning out of service. I want to have a little extra buffer, so that's kind of what we're working toward now. But even then, we're not throwing big chunks of money in there. I started a um, savings rule so that every month a little chunk of change comes out of my check and goes into the emergency fund. So that'll build up over time, and by the time I get out of service, then it will be where I want it to be. So that's kind of how we get after that. So kind of to wrap it all up, so emergency fund, you need one. I think everybody should have some kind of cash aside, not invested or anything like that. That's set aside just for emergencies. Two, it doesn't have to be complicated. Actually, it shouldn't be complicated. And then finally, just if you don't have a lot of extra cash, which enlisted service members, like, I know we're not swimming in extra cash, so it might seem a little difficult to get started at first, but you can start with something, even $50, or like I said, if you get a tax return or a bonus or something like that, just take, even if it's 500 or $1,000, and you can set that aside to start, and then work on some higher priority stuff. Like if you're trying to work down debt or something like that, that's, maybe a little more important, then, like that money would be better used than just sitting in a savings account. But I do truly believe that if you have that kind of buffer in between you and making that financial decision, you're able to make a better financial decision, because whenever you're pressed for time and you don't have a lot of resources, and you've got other things going on, you can tend to like focus in on just what the problem is and end up not looking at the whole picture, and end up making a decision that maybe isn't best in the long term. So, at a minimum, having that emergency fund gives you a little bit of buffer between you and making that decision, so that you can make a better decision for the long term. So, I hope this was helpful. If you want to get more content from me, make sure to share and subscribe. And also get on enlistedmoney.com. Check out the full article, which will be linked in the comments. And yeah, hit me up if you need me. It's hello@enlistedmoney.com. Thanks.